The honourable member for Yukon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I certainly appreciate, well, that might not have been a point of order. It was certainly a point worth raising. Thank you, and I'm pleased to stand and speak today about Motion 589, and I'd like to begin, of course, by commending the member for Prince George and Peace River for all of his work, and particularly around in support of the firearms community. I've had a lot of opportunity to work with him, and those of us on this side of the House who support the firearms community through the Hunting and Angling Caucus and other direct initiatives that we do all know that this member has a keen interest in outdoor pursuits and the hunting and our shooting way of life, and is supportive of this firearms community. He's done a lot of great work, and it's certainly great to have him as a member of our caucus. This important motion highlights our Conservative government's common sense firearms regime while introducing and while the member for Prince George and Peace River is introducing the motion to ensure that no unnecessary steps are implemented. I've heard, of course, the Liberals and the NDP today engage in a drive-by smear of outdoor enthusiasts by saying those who want to be able to obey clear rules are part of some sort of American-style gun lobby. In fact, I heard a member from the NDP question the Conservative government's obsession with firearms legislation. It's interesting. While they'll refer to it as an obsession, I would refer to it as representation. Yeah. Representation of the millions and millions of Canadians that are lawful, legal, and ethical firearms owners. So they can go ahead and call that an obsession. I call it good parliamentary representation. And those in that community, those across the country, the millions of Canadians that engage in hunting and athletic and hunting and trapping pursuits and firearms as a day-to-day tool, as a way of protecting and preserving a way of life, will not confuse this as any kind of bizarre obsession by the Conservative government, but in fact clear, unapologetic, and resounding support for a lawful, ethical, and indeed healthy way of life exercised for a long period of time in the tradition and history of Canada. This, of course, these kind of comments by both the NDP and the Liberal Party are ridiculous, and they're offensive to those millions of Canadians that own firearms. This large group of Canadians pays attention to what goes on in this place, and I know they're paying far closer attention than the members of the opposition realize or may think. And I hope that they keep that in mind when this important motion comes forward. Of course, I'd like to talk about this, and I did a little bit yesterday in my speech on Bill C-42, and there's a lot of linkages between our entire firearms policy and our firearms agenda to support these millions of Canadians. Let's talk about a representative from the Ontario Federation of Anglers and Hunters, Greg Ferrand, who said firearms owners in Canada are judges, lawyers, farmers, electricians, musicians, plumbers, accountants, federal politicians who live in and represent both rural and urban ridings. They're not criminals, they're not gang members, but rather they're lawful firearms owners who obey the law. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, their mothers, their daughters, their aunts, their uncles, their children include my children, my son. Judging by the comments that we've heard today, it seems that the NDP and the Liberals in opposition continue to believe that only backwoods, unrefined rural folk engage in these activities. And again, Mr. Speaker, that's a complete abandonment of the facts in our country and is a complete insult to those Canadians who pursue a way of life, whether that be in sport, shooting, collection, athletics, or hunting and trapping, which is a long-standing heritage, as I've mentioned. Mr. Speaker, this motion is as much about our outdoor culture and our preservation and protection of a way of life as it is about anything else. We've consistently stood up and been clear that we will do everything we can to ensure that red tape and unnecessary measures are not put in place to create a burden for lawful, ethical, and legal law-abiding firearms owners or manufacturers or ammunition producers in this country. And I think the member from Prince George Peace River outlined clearly the significant steps and the reputation that our country already has, the laws that we already have in place. So the opposition says, well, if they're already doing this, it's lawful. Why wouldn't we just go along to get along again? But the fact of the matter is why would we duplicate what we're already doing? Why would we put measures in place that duplicate the things we're already doing so well? We have a regime that's Canadian-made. We have a regime that meets the needs of Canada, a vast nation that spans from Newfoundland and Labrador all the way to the Yukon Territory, some 7,000 kilometers from coast to coast to coast, the largest archipelago in the world, remote rural Canadian locations, huge distribution networks, a vast array of needs for and purposes for firearms ownership, firearms manufacturing, firearms shipment. We need a Canadian-made solution, and that's what we have in this country. Do we need the imposition of an international body and an international governance structure telling Canada how we go about administering our laws, our rules, and our policies, given the very unique nature of the Canadian geography and the Canadian people? Of course, we've heard examples from across the floor. Well, the EU is doing this, why wouldn't we? The EU is not Canada. Not in this context. There are times where we look to other nations to model the things that they're doing well and best practices. But in this case, I think the submission from the member in his motion is that we cannot model that system now in this country under the conditions that I've outlined, under the unique geographic differences and the differences of the Canadian people and the different needs for firearms in the Canadian context, the different utilizations, the different history and the different culture. Canada, indeed, in that respect, is different. Nonetheless, we have a strong regime that we can be proud of. In fact, I would submit, Mr. Speaker, that the member would, in his motion, would confer that Canada has a model that other countries could sufficiently replicate to maintain public safety, to maintain control, to maintain tracking, and maintain order. I've spoken directly with manufacturers and with shippers in this country, and I can tell you what they tell me is that the programs, the regulations, and the inventory accountability that they need to maintain is second to none. Second to none. And in fact, Mr. Speaker, if anybody in this House were wanting to endeavor to really get the facts on that, all they'd need to do is go to a shipping location in this country and ask, how do you account for the ammunition in your facilities? How do you account for the shipping and movement of that ammunition in and out of your facilities? And you would find an incredible, intricate, regulated network of rules that absolutely guarantee preservation and protection of society, accountability, security, all the necessary measures that I think a reasonable Canadian would expect to be in place. I know that because I've been there. I know that because I've seen that. I know that because I've worked with and talked about these issues with the manufacturers. So other members in the opposition can pontificate about whether or not this would cause onerous measurements or standards, or whether this would be a big deal or not. But the simple fact of the matter is they haven't gone out and asked. They haven't been there to find out. And I can tell you with the absolute certainty that the kind of measures that are being proposed aren't good in the Canadian context, aren't fitting in with that need. And we don't need to import an international boondoggle. We need Canadian solutions developed by and developed for Canadians. We need to be able to stand proud, no doubt. We've heard that across both sides of this House, that we need to be able to stand proud and defend the system that we have in place. And again, I think there would be clear and ample submission in this House of Commons that we can defend what we have in Canada in terms of our firearms licensing regime, in terms of our firearms policies, in terms of our sale and distribution legislation, in terms of our criminal sanctions, in terms of the measures that complete a well-rounded policy. But Mr. Speaker, of course, every time, whether it's this motion, whether it's Common Sense Firearms Licensing Act, whether it's Bill 637, introduced by my friend and colleague from Dauphin Swan River, Manitoba, and chair of the Hunting and Angling Caucus, whether it was the elimination of the long gun registry. We continue to hear examples like, I register my dog, I register my cat, I register my car, why is it a big deal? But of course, those then at the time were the 7 myths of the opposition that they continued to talk about. They completely misunderstood the differences between those things. They continue then and they continue today to use fear-mongering tactics in an attempt to fundraise, in an attempt to scare Canadians. The Liberal Party's done it recently, showing pictures of scary guns that will now be available at shopping malls and easily stolen to scare Canadians into thinking somehow any of the laws we're putting in place will make it easier. Mr. Speaker, that's clearly not the case, and I'd like to thank you for your time, and I'll wrap up by concluding and saying that I invite all members to really explore this issue and consider their next steps as they move forward on this motion.
Resuming debate.